For VOA Learning English, this is the Education Report. The world's English continues to improve, says a newly released study from a Sweden-based international education company. The EF English Proficiency Index is carried out every year. The study rates the English language level of adults in 70 countries. The latest report says Sweden leads the world in English. The report places Libya last. The average level of adult English proficiency is up. But not all countries are improving. A few are even getting worse. European countries lead. Sweden is followed by the Netherlands, Denmark, and Norway in that order. China has dropped 10 places since last year. Part of this drop is because the study added 3 countries. China's neighbors continue to invest heavily in English education. Singapore, Malaysia, and India have the highest proficiency in the region. English fever continues in South Korea. People there spend more money on English education than any other place in the world. But South Korea's average English level is not improving. Latin America has shown slow improvement in English over the past 8 years. Most of the gains are among young people. Argentina is the first and only Latin American country to rank as high proficiency on the survey. The study shows English ability weakening in the Middle East and North Africa. The EF English Proficiency Index is based on the online test scores of 910,000 adults in 70 countries. You can take one of the tests used in the survey. It is called the F-Set, and you can take it online for free. For VOA Learning English, I'm Jonathan Evans.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Technology Report. Many people around the world suffer from dust-related allergies. People with allergies have trouble breathing or suffer from tightness in the chest and shortness of breath. Some allergies result from very small animals called dust mites. Dust mites live in bedding. Now, scientists in Poland say they have successfully tested cloth that blocks the microscopic animals. Most of us share our beds with thousands of dust mites. Each mite is just 1/3 of a millimeter wide. Along with dust around the home, we breathe in waste from these creatures. The waste contains enzymes called proteases. They produce chemical reactions in the body which can lead to breathlessness, coughing, or severe asthma attacks. Dust mites are hard to remove because they can easily pass through small openings in bedding. But that is not the case with the new material developed at the Medical University of Łódź in Poland. Air can pass through the material, but Dust mites cannot. People who tested the cloth say their allergic symptoms were greatly reduced. They say they can finally sleep normally. Researchers say repeated washings did not reduce the anti-allergic quality of the new fabric. More testing must be done before the material will be ready for market. Until then, people who suffer from dust allergies are advised to keep their homes dry, clean their floors often, and wash their bed sheets in hot water. For VOA Learning English, I'm Ann Ball.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. Sprint has agreed to provide direct wireless phone roaming service for foreign visitors in Cuba. It is the first United States-based company to do so. Cuba's telecommunications agency, ATEXA, and Sprint signed the deal November 2nd in Havana. Roaming service permits mobile phone users to use their devices outside of their service network. Sprint wants to reach rising numbers of foreign tourists in Cuba. The company says it expects the number of visitors there to reach 5 million a year within the next 10 years. Sprint customers will now be able to make and receive calls and texts on their personal wireless devices while in Cuba. Marcelo Claure is Sprint's president and chief executive officer. He says the deal is an important step for both countries. He also says it marks the beginning of a long-term relationship between Sprint and ATEXA. The agreement was announced at the Havana International Fair 2015. Reports say 900 businesses sent representatives to the fair. A third of them were Cuban. The U.S. was among about 70 countries that took part in the event. Sprint is not the only U.S. company offering telecommunications services in Cuba. A main competitor, Verizon, also offers roaming service to its customers visiting Cuba. However, that service is provided indirectly through a third company connected to ATEXA. Some business experts are concerned that U.S. companies have fallen behind Cuba's traditional allies, such as China, Russia, and Venezuela. Spain also has developed successful commercial relations with Cuba. For VOA Learning English, I'm Jonathan Evans.
For VOA Learning English, this is the Education Report. In early November, thousands of people in London marched in the streets to protest the rising cost of education. The demonstration followed similar protests in South Africa and Chile earlier this year. The British demonstrators were angry about a plan to cut one type of student financial assistance. The so-called maintenance grants help full-time higher education students with the cost of living. Students do not have to pay the money back to the government. But in 2016, that will change. The government says it will provide maintenance loans instead of grants. The students will have to repay the loans. Critics say the cuts will affect mostly low and middle income students. That issue was also at the center of the student protests in South Africa. The University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg announced in mid-October that it would increase fees by 10% next year. Students at the school protested immediately, and the uprising spread to universities across the country. The protests worked. On October 23rd, South African President Jacob Zuma declared there would be no increase to university fees. In Chile, students have been protesting throughout the year. One reason they demonstrated was the disparity in education between the country's rich and poor. In early November, the protesters saw some success. Chile's president signed a bill that places public education under the control of the central government. It is designed to give all public schools an equal share of resources. For VOA Learning English, I'm Ann Ball.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Technology Report. A recent study warns that too much time spent playing computer games could hurt performance in school. The National Children's Bureau reported the results of the study. It says that too many hours of computer use can decrease student success in school. The National Children's Bureau is a private organization that explores issues affecting children and young people in Britain. Recently, the Northern Ireland office reported the results of a study called ICT and Me. The study involved more than 600 teenagers between the ages of 14 and 16. It took place over a period of 2 years, from 2012 to 2014. It found that teenagers who played computer games less than once a week were more successful in school than those who played them twice a day or more. 41% of the students who used gaming devices 2 or more times a day received passing grades in school exams. That compared with 77% of those who rarely played the games. The study found that social media use did not affect school performance. Many parents say their children are becoming increasingly dependent on computer games. Some have compared excessive gaming to drug addiction. The study did not explore addiction, but it did suggest that computer games can cause children to stay awake late at night. A lack of sleep makes children tired. Tired children are more likely to have trouble paying attention in school. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Persutti.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Health Report. Research suggests that the bubonic plague existed thousands of years before it caused widespread death in 14th century Europe. Danish researchers examining human teeth fossils have discovered evidence of the plague from almost 5,000 years ago. In the middle 1300s, the disease killed 50 to 60% of Europe's population. But the bacterium was not nearly as aggressive in its earlier form. That is what the study's leader, Simon Rasmussen, of Denmark's Technical University says. He helped examine 101 fossilized teeth from the Bronze Age, about 5,000 years ago. Only 7 of those teeth contained evidence of the plague. This suggests the bacterium did not spread as easily then as it did later. Today, even infected fleas can pass the disease to humans. Rasmussen said the Bronze Age plague did not have the gene that makes it able to live in a flea. The Danish researchers had earlier reported on genomic studies of the plague. Those studies said the plague might have been part of widespread disease that led to the fall of classical Greece and hurt the ancient Roman army. Rasmussen says the ancient epidemics may also have led to a number of mass migrations. Plague is rare today. A large outbreak happened in India in 1994 when almost 700 cases were reported. With early antibiotic treatment, Rasmussen says the plague is almost completely curable. The latest findings are published in the journal Cell. For VOA Learning English, I'm Jonathan Evans. From VOA Learning English, this is the Science Report. Many cultures around the world have a grain that is not grown or even known outside its home area. Quinoa is from South America. Amaranth fed the Aztecs in Central America. Now, an ancient grain from Ethiopia is for sale in stores across America. It is called teff. It has been an important part of the Ethiopian diet for thousands of years. The small grain is mainly used to make flour. The Ethiopian flatbread injera is made with teff. Wayne Carlson learned about teff while doing public health work in Africa in the mid-1970s. When Carlson returned to the U.S., he decided teff grass would grow well in certain areas. He says parts of Idaho, Oregon, and Nevada are geologically similar to Ethiopia. Wayne and his wife Elizabeth got some farmers to grow teff. The Carlsons buy and mill the grain. Early on, there were no Ethiopian businesses in Idaho to sell the flour to. So the Carlsons searched the local phone directory for Ethiopian names and called them. The Teff Company has slowly grown, serving Ethiopian and Eritrean communities in the U.S. Now, the Carlsons say the Teff flour they produce also goes to food stores and bakeries. Sales of alternatives to modern wheat are growing quickly each year in the U.S. Rich Roseberg is a food researcher at Oregon State University. He says U.S. teff growing increased from 1,200 hectares in 2003 to more than 40,000 by 2010. He says most of the teff is fed to farm animals. But in Idaho, Roseberg believes more of the teff production is for human food. Teff contains lots of calcium, iron, protein, and fiber. For VOA Learning English, I'm Jonathan Evans.